They say there's a place in North Carolina called the Devil's Tramping Ground, where no grass grows and animals won't go. I never thought much about it. I had bigger problems: bills, late payments, and a job market that didn't look kindly on a middle-aged cleaning supervisor. But when a job listing came through my email, cleaning supervisor needed, rural gas station, Chatham County, I decided to take it. What choice did I have? The station itself sat off the main road, practically leaning into the infamous clearing. As I pulled into the gravel lot, the first thing I noticed was the oppressive silence. No crickets, no birds, just the faint rustle of the wind through skeletal trees. The owner, a wiry man named Keith with deep-set eyes and a permanent scowl, handed me a mop with a cracked wooden handle and muttered something about sticking to the rules. I brushed it off at first, thinking he meant the usual health and safety protocols. But then I saw the mop water, dark, swirling and full of shapes I couldn't quite focus on. Keith left without further explanation, muttering, "Don't break them." When I asked what he meant, he just shook his head and drove off, leaving me alone in the dying light of the evening. It wasn't until I started mopping that I saw them, patterns in the water, forming and reforming like living ink. Rules. 7 of them. Clear, haunting, and utterly unignorable. The rules. Rule 1. Do not mop after midnight. Rule 2. If the mop water begins to bubble, stop immediately and recite the words, "By light of day, darkness stay." Rule 3. Avoid mopping near the clearing. The closer you get, the louder the whispers will become. Rule 4. Never let the mop handle break completely, or the circle will close. Rule 5. If you hear footsteps but see no one, stop mopping and leave the room. Rule 6. Should the lights flicker 3 times in a row, pour salt into the mop water before continuing. Rule 7. Under no circumstances should you look in the water. I read them over and over, trying to convince myself it was a prank or some bizarre workplace hazing ritual. But as the night stretched on, the gas station began to feel alive. The lights buzzed faintly, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest like a weight. I held the mop tightly, the splintered handle rough under my fingers, and whispered to myself, "It's just a job, just a damn job." But I could already tell, this was no ordinary place. I told myself it was just another cleaning job. How bad could it be? The gas station itself was old, but not in the charming, nostalgic kind of way. It had the vibe of a forgotten relic: dusty shelves stocked with expired goods, a broken neon open sign that buzzed weakly, and a flickering light above the counter. It wasn't inviting, and maybe that's what made it worse. It felt like the kind of place people avoided for a reason. After Keith left, the silence crept back in, wrapping around the station like a suffocating blanket. The cleaning supplies were stored in a small utility closet near the back. I pulled out the mop and bucket, trying to ignore how old and splintered the handle looked. The bucket, filled halfway with water, already smelled faintly metallic, like rust. I assumed it was just dirty pipes and got to work. The first hour passed uneventfully. I wiped down counters, restocked a few shelves, and swept the front entryway. But as I pushed the mop across the floor, the handle creaked loudly, a sound that felt unnaturally amplified in the quiet. The mop water rippled with each stroke, but something about the ripples caught my eye. They weren't random like they should have been. They moved with purpose, forming shapes that dissolved before I could fully make sense of them. It was when I reached the far corner near the restrooms that the first pattern appeared clearly. Words, faint but unmistakable. "Do not mop after midnight." I froze, staring down at the water as it stilled, the words disappearing as quickly as they had come. My first thought was that I was tired and imagining things. But then I moved the mop again, and another set of words appeared, swirling in the water as if being written by an invisible hand. If the mop water begins to bubble, stop immediately and recite the words, "By light of day, darkness stay." My breath caught in my throat, and I let the mop fall against the wall. I looked around the empty station, half expecting to see Keith standing in the doorway laughing at me. But I was alone. Just me, the mop, and that dark water in the bucket. I considered walking out right then. My car was still in the lot, and there wasn't a soul around to stop me. But the paycheck was real, and my bills weren't going to pay themselves. I convinced myself it was some kind of elaborate joke, a leftover Halloween prank, or maybe a twisted way of messing with new employees. I mopped again, this time slower, watching the water like a hawk. Another rule emerged. Avoid mopping near the clearing. The closer you get, the louder the whispers will become. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, like a distant breeze, but unmistakable. Whispering. Words I couldn't quite make out, layered and overlapping like a broken record. I dropped the mop and backed away, heart pounding in my chest. The whispers stopped as soon as I let go of the mop. The water in the bucket stilled completely, the surface black and reflective. I caught a glimpse of my own face in it, pale and wide-eyed. But something else was there too, just behind me, a shape that vanished the second I turned around. It wasn't just a job. I knew that now, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. The rest of the night I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation, the loneliness of working in a forgotten gas station on a cursed piece of land. But there was something about the silence. It wasn't normal silence. It was thick, oppressive, and it hummed with an energy that made the back of my neck prickle. I avoided the mop for as long as I could, busying myself with other tasks. I cleaned the shelves, swept the front counter, and even took inventory of the stockroom, even though no one asked me to. But eventually, the floor needed cleaning, and I found myself standing in front of the mop bucket again. The water had turned murky, darker than it had been earlier, and the metallic smell was stronger. I tried not to look directly into it as I stirred the mop. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out and start fresh. A part of me was terrified of what I might see in clean water. I started mopping near the front counter, avoiding the corner by the restrooms where the first words had appeared. For a while, everything seemed fine. But then the whispers returned. This time, they were louder. They weren't coming from the bucket or the mop. They were coming from the clearing just outside the station. I couldn't see it from where I stood, but I knew it was there. An infamous spot in the woods where nothing grew. Not even weeds. It had been the subject of local legends for decades. People said it was the devil's tramping ground, a cursed place where strange things happened, where people disappeared. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They sounded like voices calling my name. Beth. The sound was soft, almost tender, but layered with a static-like distortion that made it grating to hear. I froze mid-stroke, the mop handle slick in my sweating palms. I turned toward the windows, but the clearing was hidden in the darkness beyond the weak fluorescent lights of the station. The shadows seemed to shift, though, as if something was moving out there. Watching. I felt a vibration in the mop handle and looked down. The water was bubbling. Not boiling, just bubbling softly, like carbonation rising to the surface. My heart leapt into my throat as I remembered the rule. If the mop water begins to bubble, stop immediately and recite the words, "By light of day, darkness stay." My mouth was dry, but I forced myself to speak. By light of day, Darkness, stay, I whispered, my voice trembling. The bubbles stopped instantly, the water turning still and dark once more. The whispers faded, but not entirely. They lingered, faint and taunting, just on the edge of hearing. I stepped back from the mop, my hands shaking. I didn't want to touch it again. But the floor wasn't finished, and the clock told me there were hours left on my shift. I glanced at the door, the keys to my car in my pocket, and considered leaving. But the paycheck was good. Too good to walk away from. I spent the next hour sitting behind the counter, staring at the mop and bucket as if it might spring to life at any moment. The water had settled again, but I couldn't get the bubbling or the whispers out of my mind. Was it the isolation getting to me? Or had I really just performed some kind of incantation to stop something? I needed air. The gas station door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing into the empty night. The air outside was cooler than I expected, but it carried a faint smell of decay that made me wince. I glanced toward the clearing, barely visible through the sparse trees. A faint glow seemed to pulse from the area, a sickly greenish hue that didn't look natural. I decided not to investigate. The whispers might have stopped, but I wasn't taking any more risks tonight. Back inside, I busied myself with restocking the snack shelves. It was mindless work, but it kept my hands occupied and my thoughts at bay. That's when I saw it, a mark etched into the floor near the back room. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. The mark was small at first glance, a faint circular symbol that looked almost burned into the tiles. I knelt to inspect it closer, but the more I stared, the more it seemed to shift. The edges of the symbol blurred and wavered, as though it was alive, breathing. That's when I remembered another rule. If you notice a symbol appear on the floor, do not touch it. Spray it with water and salt, and wait until it fades. Do not turn your back on it. The instructions were clear, but where the hell was I supposed to find salt? I rifled through the drawers behind the counter, knocking over pens and loose receipts in my panic. The whispers were back, louder this time, and I could feel a vibration in the air, as though the gas station itself was alive and agitated. Finally, I found a small container of salt packets, the kind customers used for their chips or peanuts. I tore several open, dumping the grains into the mop bucket before dragging it toward the mark. The whispering intensified as I drew closer, a jumble of overlapping voices speaking in a strange tongue I couldn't comprehend. I dunked the mop into the salty water and wrung it out, the handle trembling in my hands. With one swift motion, I swiped it over the mark. The reaction was immediate. The symbol hissed and sizzled as though I'd poured acid on it, and the air filled with the stench of burning hair. My stomach turned, but I kept going, scrubbing the mark until it dissolved completely. The whispers stopped again, leaving a silence so sudden and profound it was almost deafening. My breath came in short gasps, my chest tight with fear. Whatever this job was, it was far worse than I'd anticipated. As I stood there, mop in hand, I glanced at the clock. Midnight. The next wave of strangeness was likely just around the corner. Midnight in Devil's Tramping Ground felt different than any other time. The air became heavier, almost tangible, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The faint hum of insects that had accompanied the night was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that made every creak of the building feel deafening. I decided to focus on organizing the supply room. The simple task kept my mind off the night's eerie events. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I would pause and glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something standing there. But it was always just the empty rows of shelves. As I worked, I heard it. the faint crunch of footsteps outside. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, straining to listen. The sound came again, slow and deliberate, moving across the gravel lot in front of the station. I moved toward the counter, my eyes fixed on the glass door. A figure emerged from the darkness, backlit by the dim overhead lights of the gas pumps. It was a man, or at least, it appeared to be a man. He wore an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in photographs from the 1920s, complete with a bowler hat and a pocket watch chain glinting under the faint light. His gait was unnatural, stiff and jerky, like a puppet on strings. My mind flashed to another rule. If someone approaches the station after midnight, do not open the door. Speak to them through the glass. If they demand to be let in, ignore them. Whatever you do not meet their eyes. I swallowed hard, repeating the rule in my head like a mantra. The man stopped just outside the door, his head tilting to the side as though studying me. I avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the polished tips of his shoes. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth but hollow, like it was coming from an old radio. "May I come in?" I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. "We're closed." The man didn't respond right away. He just stood there, unnervingly still. The silence stretched, and I felt my resolve waver. Then he spoke again. "Are you sure? It's quite cold out here." His tone was polite, almost pleading, but something about it set every nerve in my body on edge. I gripped the counter tightly, my knuckles turning white. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't let you in." The man sighed, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the entire building. "Very well," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "But I'll be back." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I stayed rooted to the spot, my heart pounding. When I finally found the courage to move, I noticed something chilling. Where the man had been standing, the ground was scorched, the gravel blackened as though it had been burned. I backed away from the door, my breath shaky. Whatever I'd signed up for, it wasn't just a job, it was a nightmare. The encounter with the man left me rattled, but I tried to push it aside and continue working. The mop bucket sat in the corner, its wooden handle cracked and warped. I hadn't touched it since earlier that evening, but something about it now felt wrong. The water inside had grown darker, the faint glow of the station lights reflecting off its surface now muddied and dim. I approached it cautiously, my hands trembling. The bucket was part of my job, sure, but now it felt more like an adversary. As I grabbed the handle, I remembered the next rule. Rule number 4. Do not mop the floor after midnight unless absolutely necessary. If you must mop, avoid the center of the station. If the water begins to bubble, stop immediately. The center of the station had always given me an odd feeling. The tiles were slightly off, like they'd been poorly replaced, and the air above them felt warmer. The manager had said nothing about it when I was hired, but the rule added a layer of dread to its mystery. The first stroke of the mop was fine, quiet, uneventful. I worked along the edges of the station, avoiding the center as instructed. The repetitive motion was calming, almost meditative, and for a moment, I thought the worst of the night might be over. Then the bubbles began. It started as a faint ripple, a few tiny bubbles breaking the surface of the water in the bucket. My grip tightened on the handle, my pulse quickening. The ripples grew larger, the bubbles multiplying until the water churned violently, frothing over the sides of the bucket like boiling soup. I stepped back, horrified. The bubbling wasn't random. It was forming shapes, words. They emerged in stark relief against the frothing blackness, letters twisting and shifting as though alive. Leave while you can. I staggered back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. The water in the bucket continued to churn, the letters dissolving into meaningless patterns before reforming into another message. "It's too late." I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as I watched the mop bucket, half expecting something to crawl out of it. The water stilled, the bubbles dissipating as quickly as they'd come. But the message was clear. I wasn't safe. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the center of the station. The tiles there seemed to shimmer, almost imperceptibly, as though something beneath them was shifting. I gripped the mop handle tightly, my knuckles white, and backed away. I wasn't about to find out what was down there. The rest of the station felt suffocating. Every shadow seemed to reach for me, every sound amplified in the unnatural silence. My only solace was the clock. It was nearing 2 a.m., only a few more hours to go. But as I looked back at the bucket, I saw something that made my heart stop. The water was bubbling again. The bubbles in the bucket weren't forming words anymore. Instead, they writhed and twisted into shapes, human-like shapes. Small, clawed hands broke the surface, forming and dissolving as though the water was trying to manifest something or someone. I stepped back, clutching the mop handle like a lifeline. The faint sound of whispers filled the station. At first, they were unintelligible, like wind rushing through cracks, but soon they grew clearer. It wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of overlapping murmurs, each one desperate, pleading, accusing. "Help us. Why didn't you stop it? You shouldn't have come here." The rules raced through my mind. I hadn't mopped the center of the station, but I couldn't shake the feeling that breaking Rule 4 had set something in motion. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears, until they coalesced into a single, sharp command. "Look." Against every instinct, I turned to face the center of the station. The tiles there shimmered again, the faint warmth I'd felt earlier now radiating like an open furnace. I stepped closer, drawn in despite the dread pooling in my gut. The tiles were vibrating, ever so slightly. I crouched down, my breath shallow, and touched the edge of one. It was hot, too hot. I recoiled, staring as the tile beneath my hand began to shift. Slowly, it sank, revealing a hollow space beneath. The whispers stopped. A new sound emerged, a low, guttural groan, as if the station itself were alive. The tile dropped fully into the hollow, revealing what looked like a large, rusted hatch. Its edges were scorched black, the metal warped and jagged. In the center of the hatch was a symbol, carved deeply into the surface. It looked like an eye, or perhaps a flame. It was hard to tell. The mop bucket tipped over behind me, the water spilling out in a thick black wave. It raced across the floor, defying gravity as it flowed toward the hatch. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as the black water pooled into the grooves of the symbol, filling it until it glowed faintly. Then, with a deafening creak, the hatch began to open. I scrambled to my feet, backing away as the heat from the hatch intensified. A sickly, sulfuric smell filled the air, making my stomach churn. The hatch groaned open, revealing nothing but darkness, an endless, impenetrable void. And then, something moved. It was slow at first, a shadow shifting within the darkness. But as it came closer, I saw it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a figure, human-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its face, it didn't have one. Just a blank, smooth surface where eyes and a mouth should have been. The figure reached the edge of the hatch and paused. It tilted its head, as if listening, before slowly turning in my direction. I froze, unable to move as it began to crawl out. The lights in the station flickered violently, plunging me into intermittent darkness. Each time they flickered back on, the figure was closer, its body contorted, its faceless head snapping toward me with each burst of light. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The only thing I could do was run. I bolted for the front door, the faceless thing crawling after me in fits and starts. Every time I looked back, its distorted limbs were stretching unnaturally, like it was trying to fit itself into the human shape it couldn't quite replicate. Its blank head jerked toward me as if it could sense my movements without eyes to see. The whispers returned, louder than ever, but now they were pleading, demanding. "Close it! You must close it! Do not leave it open! If you run, it will find you!" My hand reached the door handle, but when I yanked on it, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the entire station had locked itself down. I slammed my fists against the glass, screaming, but the only response was the low, guttural groaning from the floor behind me. The hatch, the whispers, the rules. I turned around, heart pounding, and saw the figure standing now, its grotesque limbs fully extended. It tilted its head, as if mocking me, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. Behind it, the hatch gaped open, the glowing symbol pulsing faintly. The heat in the room was unbearable now, sweat dripping down my face and stinging my eyes. I staggered toward the hatch, desperate and trembling. The mop lay discarded on the floor, and I grabbed it with shaking hands. The whispers grew into frenzied shouts, countless voices joining together with the same desperate message. "Close it! Close it before it's too late!" I jabbed the mop into the hatch, trying to force it shut, but the blackened edges wouldn't move. The figure was closer now, its movements jerky but purposeful. I dropped the mop and shoved at the hatch with both hands, the heat searing my palms. "It's too late," a single, cold voice whispered in my ear. I whipped around, but no one was there. The figure stopped, standing just feet from me. For the first time, it raised a hand, pointing at me with a long, jagged finger. The hatch began to rumble, and the glowing symbol flared so brightly I had to shield my eyes. When I looked back, the figure was gone. But I wasn't alone. The bubbling black water from the mop bucket was seeping across the floor, pooling around my feet. Hands began to emerge. Human hands, clawing at the tiles as though trying to pull themselves free. One by one, figures began to rise from the floor, their faces twisted in agony. These weren't shadows or faceless things. These were people, broken, tortured, and wrong. I stumbled back, tripping over the mop and landing hard on the floor. The figures advanced, their eyes hollow and accusing. "You opened it," one of them rasped, its voice wet and gurgling. "Now you must close it." I tried," I stammered, crawling backward. "It won't shut." "Because you broke the rules." The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. The rules. I hadn't mopped the center of the station. I hadn't followed the sequence. The figures loomed over me now, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. The hatch pulsed again, and a deep, guttural voice echoed from within. "Take her." The figures lunged, their cold, wet hands grabbing at my arms and legs. I screamed, thrashing and kicking, but their grip was unrelenting. They dragged me toward the hatch, the heat from the glowing symbol scorching my skin. I clawed at the floor, but it was no use. As they pulled me closer, I saw something in the darkness of the hatch. Faces. Dozens of them, staring back at me with the same hollow, accusing eyes. And then I was falling. The gas station stands silent now, a relic of isolation under the relentless North Carolina moonlight. The faint hum of the neon "Open 24/7" sign buzzes in the otherwise oppressive quiet. To any passing traveler, it's just another rural pit stop, A place to grab a drink, stretch their legs, maybe ask for directions before heading back onto the highway. Inside, the air is heavy, laced with the faint scent of burning wood and damp soil. The mop bucket sits where I left it, the black water still bubbling faintly, though no one would notice unless they were paying attention. The floor is clean now, spotless, gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. A small, cracked wooden sign rests on the counter, scrawled in faded letters. Rules are posted in the back room. Read carefully. No one has come in for days, maybe weeks. Time moves strangely here. I think I've been here for hours, but my reflection in the darkened windows tells a different story. My once short hair is tangled and matted now, my uniform covered in stains I don't remember making. My hands, those are the worst. They're not my hands anymore. They're too thin, too pale, the knuckles raw and red. They tremble when I reach for the cash register, though there's no reason to. No one's buying anything. The hatch in the floor stays closed now. I've made sure of that. I mop every corner of the station at exactly the right times, muttering the sequence under my breath like a prayer. I don't dare miss a step. The whispers still come, though, reminding me, guiding me, mocking me. You'll get it wrong eventually. Sometimes I hear footsteps outside, but no one ever enters. The shadows of the pumps stretch unnaturally long across the parking lot, reaching toward the building like they're alive. And the black water, God, the water. It's everywhere now. I mop it up, and it just comes back, spreading slowly, deliberately, like it's waiting for me to slip up. The worst part, though, is the reflection in the glass of the front door. It's not mine anymore, not completely. Sometimes, when I glance at it too quickly, I see someone else staring back. A woman, older than me, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. I think she was here before me. I think she didn't follow the rules. I wonder how long I'll last. Maybe until the next person shows up. Someone who's desperate, who needs a job badly enough to take this one without asking too many questions. I'll hand them the mop, smile like it's just another mundane task, and tell them, the rules are posted in the back. Read carefully. And then I'll walk out the front door and never look back. At least that's what I tell myself. But deep down, I know the truth.